The judge slid 2 original documents across the bench and said, "Ms. Allen, explain this." Why were there 2 originals with the same signature? Why did my own family look at me like I'd already been found guilty? And why was my cousin so calm, like he knew exactly how this would end? Lucas Reed leaned back and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's been around paperwork her whole life. If anyone could fake it, it's her. But I wasn't looking at the signature. I was looking at the paper, and something about it didn't belong. If you're watching this from somewhere else, tell me your country and what time it is where you are. And if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, you'll understand why I need to tell this story. 6 months earlier, I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, watching Lucas Reed pour her morning coffee like he owned the place. He didn't actually live there. Not officially. But his jacket hung on the back of the same chair every time I visited, and his car was always in the driveway before mine. It had been that way for at least a year, ever since Grandma Evelyn started forgetting little things like where she left her keys or whether she'd already taken her medication. "I've got it," Hazel Lucas said, not looking at me as he stirred sugar into her cup. "You just got in. Go sit." It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Like I was a guest. Like this wasn't the house I spent half my childhood in. Grandma smiled when she saw me, her eyes lighting up in that familiar way. "You made it," she said, reaching for my hand. "You always make time." "I try," I said, gently squeezing her fingers. Her skin felt thinner than I remembered, almost fragile. Lucas set the mug down in front of her before she could stand. "Careful, it's hot," he said, placing his hand briefly on her shoulder. It looked like care. It sounded like care. And if you didn't know better, you'd believe it was. But I did know better. Or at least I was starting to. I'd spent 10 years working as a forensic document examiner. I made a living studying the details. People overlooked ink flow pressure patterns, how a hand hesitates or moves without thinking. It's not glamorous work, but it teaches you something important. Small inconsistencies don't happen by accident. Not when they repeat. And lately they had been repeating. "Hazel." "My mom." Deborah Allen called from the hallway. "Can you come look at something?" I followed her into the den. A stack of papers sat on the desk, insurance forms, utility bills, and a few legal documents. "Lucas has been helping your grandmother get everything organized," she said. "It's been a blessing, honestly." I nodded, but my attention was already drifting to the signatures. Grandma Evelyn Parker had always signed her name the same way. Even as her handwriting changed with age, the rhythm stayed consistent, slight upward slant, firm pressure on the downstrokes, a clean loop in the P of Parker. The signature on the top document looked close. Close enough that most people wouldn't question it. But the pressure was off. "Something wrong?" Mom asked. "No," I said automatically. "Just..." Noticing how much paperwork there is, I flipped to the next page. Same signature. Same subtle stiffness. Like someone trying to imitate a natural movement but thinking too hard about it. "You're overanalyzing," Mom said with a small laugh. "Not everything is a case." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was projecting my work onto my family. But then I noticed the dates. 3 documents, signed within the same week, all with that same slightly unnatural flow. "Where's the rest?" I asked. "The rest of what?" "Older documents. Anything from before Lucas started helping." Mom shrugged. "Probably in the filing cabinet." "Why?" "No reason," I said again. I didn't push. Not yet. Back in the kitchen, Lucas was scrolling through his phone while Grandma slowly sipped her coffee. "You're quiet," he said, glancing up at me.
That's new.
Just tired, I replied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes.
City life must be rough.
Something like that. There was a pause, short but heavy, like we were both waiting for the other to say what we were actually thinking. Grandma broke it first.
Lucas has been such a help, she said softly.
I don't know what I'd do without him. I'm glad, I said, forcing a smile. And I meant it. At least I wanted to. But help shouldn't feel like control. Later that afternoon, while Grandma napped, I wandered down the hallway toward her bedroom. The house hadn't changed much, the same framed photos, the same worn carpet, but something felt different. Subtle, like a shift you couldn't quite name. The door to her room was slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the desk. It used to be cluttered letters, old notebooks, a box of pens she refused to throw away. Now, it was clean. Too clean, except for one thing. A small drawer on the right side had a brass lock I didn't recognize. I frowned. Grandma never locked anything. Not even when she probably should have. I pulled the handle lightly. It didn't budge. Looking for something, Lucas's voice came from the doorway behind me. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. Just checking on her.
She's resting,
he said.
You don't want to wake her.
I wasn't going to. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space in a way that made it feel smaller.
That drawer's just old paperwork. Nothing interesting. Then why lock it?
He smiled again, that same polite, controlled smile.
Because people go through things that aren't theirs.
The words landed harder than they should have.
I'm not people, Lucas. No,
he said.
Your family.
It didn't sound like a compliment. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then he gestured toward the hallway. Come on, Mom's asking about dinner. I followed him out, but my mind stayed in that room, on that locked drawer, on those signatures, and on the way he'd answered too quickly, like he'd been expecting the question. That night, after everyone went to bed, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't adding up. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was imagining things and started wondering what Lucas was trying so hard to hide. I didn't sleep much that night in Dayton. By morning, I had already decided I wasn't going to confront Lucas, not yet. I needed something he couldn't explain away with charm or family loyalty. Something that would hold up outside this house. Back in Chicago, a few days later, I spread everything I had across my office desk. Copies of Grandma Evelyn's past signatures, bank forms, old birthday cards she'd signed over the years, holiday checks she used to send me with a note in the corner that always said the same thing: don't spend it all at once. I sat down with a pen light and a magnifier, the same tools I'd used on hundreds of cases before this one. Only this time it felt different. This time the person behind the signature wasn't a stranger.
Okay,
Ethan Brooks said, leaning against the door frame.
You've been staring at those for 2 hours. Either you found something or you're about to hallucinate patterns.
I wish it were that dramatic, I said without looking up.
Come here.
He stepped closer, setting his coffee on the edge of the desk.
What am I looking at?
I pointed to 2 signatures. One from a birthday card 3 years ago, the other from a recent legal document Lucas had helped file. They look identical, Ethan said. They're supposed to, I replied. But watch this. I slid both under the magnifier and adjusted the light. See the downstroke on the E in Evelyn? He squinted.
Yeah.
On the older one, the pressure increases naturally as the pen moves down. You get a slight ink spread at the base. That's muscle memory. It's not something people think about, it just happens. And the new one. The pressure is even. Too even. I tapped the glass lightly. It's controlled, not instinctive. Like someone trying to imitate the effect instead of producing it. Ethan frowned. So you're saying it's forged? I'm saying it's assisted, I said carefully. Not a clean fake. Something more subtle. He crossed his arms. Walk me through that. I leaned back slightly, choosing my words. If you try to forge a signature from scratch, you usually mess up the rhythm. It looks stiff. But if you have a real signature, something already written, you can trace it, transfer it, or practice until you get very close. Like copying homework, he said. Exactly. Except here the person might have had access to dozens of real samples. Ethan's expression shifted. Family member? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for another document one Lucas had emailed me a week before Grandma passed. He asked me to review this, I said he wanted a second opinion. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's bold. Or strategic, I said. I placed it next to the others. This one is cleaner, I continued. Closer to her natural rhythm. But look at the spacing between the first and last name. Ethan leaned in again. It's tighter, too tight. Like it was copied from a sample that didn't leave enough room. He exhaled slowly. So some are better than others. Which means whoever did this was improving, I said. Practicing. The word hung in the air longer than I expected. Ethan straightened. You need to take this to a lawyer. I already called Linda Shaw, I said. She's reviewing everything. And your family? I shook my head. Not yet. If I'm wrong, I don't want to accuse someone without proof. And if I'm right, I paused. Ethan finished it for me. Then this is bigger than a family argument. It already felt that way. 2 days later, Linda called. I've looked over what you sent, she said. You're right to be cautious. That doesn't sound reassuring. It's not meant to be, she replied. Hazel, there's a new will on file. Filed very recently. My grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean new? I mean your grandmother updated her will within the last month of her life. That's not possible, I said. She was barely... I stopped myself. Who filed it? Lucas Reed was listed as the point of contact. Of course he was. What does it say? I asked. There was a brief pause on the line. It significantly changes the distribution of assets, Linda said. He inherits the majority. I closed my eyes. And me? I asked. You're mentioned, she said carefully. But it's minimal. I let out a quiet breath, more steady than I felt. This is the document with the questionable signature, isn't it? Yes. Has it been challenged yet? No, Linda said. But if you're suggesting forgery, we need more than inconsistencies. We need something objective, something a court can't ignore. I know, I said. I'm working on it. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the documents without really seeing them. It wasn't just about money. If this will stood, it meant the narrative Lucas was building would become permanent, that he had been the responsible one, the caretaker, the one Grandma trusted most. And I would be... What? The distant granddaughter who showed up too late. The one who questioned everything. The one who apparently might even forge a signature. My phone buzzed again. A message from my mom. Grandma's condition is getting worse. You should come back. I read it twice, then a third time. Something about the timing didn't sit right. I looked back at the documents on my desk, the signatures, the dates, the subtle differences that only someone trained to see would notice. And then at the calendar. The will had been filed less than 3 weeks ago. Too recent. Too convenient. I grabbed my keys, If there was ever a moment to see the truth clearly, it wasn't going to be from behind a desk in Chicago. It was going to be in that house, in that room, and maybe inside that locked drawer. Because whatever Lucas had done, I was starting to believe he hadn't finished yet. By the time I got back to Dayton, it was already dark. The house looked the same from the outside, soft porch light, the same wind chime by the door, but something in my chest tightened before I even stepped inside. Like I already knew I wasn't walking into the same place I'd left. Mom opened the door before I knocked. "You came fast," Deborah said, pulling me into a quick hug that felt more automatic than emotional. "She's been in and out all day." "How bad?" I asked. Mom hesitated. "Worse than last week." That was all I needed to hear. I moved past her down the hallway toward Grandma Evelyn's room. The door was half open again, just like before. Inside, the air smelled faintly of medicine and lavender. She was lying in bed, smaller somehow, frailer. The kind of change that happens gradually until one day it feels sudden. "Grandma," I said softly. Her eyes opened after a second, unfocused at first, then settling on me. "Hazel," she whispered. I took her hand, careful not to squeeze too tightly. "I'm here," she smiled faintly. "You always come back." There was something in her voice, something that made my throat tighten. "I need to ask you something," I said gently, "about the paperwork Lucas has been helping you with." Her brow furrowed like she was reaching for a thought just out of reach. "Papers." "Yes," she murmured. "He said it was important." "What kind of papers? I don't remember all of it," she said. "He would bring them. Tell me where to sign." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "Did you read them?" She hesitated. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes I was too tired." He'd say it was the same as before, that nothing changed, that nothing changed. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Grandma," I said carefully, "did you ever sign anything more than once? Like the same paper, but again later?" Her eyes shifted slightly, like she was trying to focus on something distant. "He asked me to redo one," she said after a moment. "Said I smudged it." My grip on her hand tightened before I could stop myself. "Did you?" She nodded faintly. "I trusted him." "Of course she did." I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. "Do you remember when that was?" "No," she whispered. "The days, they blend." I didn't push further. She was already exhausted. "Okay," I said softly. "That's okay." I sat with her for a while, just holding her hand, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. For a moment, it felt like nothing else mattered, not the documents, not Lucas, not any of it. But that moment didn't last. A shadow moved in the doorway. Lucas. He didn't step inside this time. He just leaned against the frame, watching. "She needs rest," he said quietly. "I know," I replied without looking at him. "Then you should let her sleep." I stood slowly, placing Grandma's hand back on the blanket. "I'll be back in the morning," I told her. She nodded faintly, her eyes already closing again. As I stepped into the hallway, Lucas straightened. "What did she tell you?" he asked. "Enough," I said. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted just slightly. "You shouldn't be putting ideas in her head," he said. "I asked her questions," I replied. "That's not the same thing. It is when she's not in a position to answer clearly." I turned to face him fully. Then maybe she shouldn't be signing legal documents. The silence that followed was sharp. He looked at me for a long second, then smiled, but it was thinner this time, less controlled. "You've always thought you were smarter than everyone else," he said. "No," I said calmly, "just more careful." His jaw tightened just enough for me to notice.
"Be careful, Hazel," he said. "Accusing someone of something like this, it can backfire." "Good thing I'm not accusing," I replied.
Not yet. We held each other's gaze for a moment longer. Then he stepped aside, letting me pass. I didn't go back to the guest room. I went straight to Grandma's bedroom once the house was quiet. The hallway creaked under my weight, each step louder than it should have been. I paused outside her door, listening. Nothing, just the low hum of the house settling. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The room looked the same as before. Too clean, too controlled. I moved to the desk. The locked drawer was still there. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge. The lock wasn't old, it was new, recently installed, which meant whatever was inside hadn't always been hidden. I stood scanning the room. Grandma never locked things, so if she didn't do it, someone else did. I checked the top of the desk. Nothing. The lamp. The picture frames. Then the jewelry box. It sat slightly askew, like it had been moved and not quite put back. I opened it carefully. Inside, beneath a row of simple necklaces and a pair of earrings, I remembered from childhood there was a small key. I stared at it for a second, then picked it up. It was the right size. My pulse quickened as I knelt back down and slid the key into the lock. For a moment I hesitated, not because I was unsure, but because I knew that once I opened it, whatever was inside would change everything. I turned the key. The lock clicked. I pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside was a stack of documents neatly arranged, and on top, an envelope with my name written in Grandma's handwriting. Not a copy, not a scan. Original ink. I froze, staring at it, because whatever Lucas had been controlling, he hadn't meant for me to see this, and I had a feeling this envelope was the one thing he couldn't explain away. I didn't open the envelope right away. For a few seconds, I just sat there on the floor beside the desk, holding it in both hands, feeling the texture of the paper. It wasn't new, slightly worn at the edges, the kind of envelope Grandma kept in a drawer for years before finally using it. My name was written across the front in her handwriting, steady, familiar, unmistakably hers. Hazel. No last name. She never needed one with me. I exhaled slowly, then slipped a finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a single folded letter and a smaller document clipped behind it. I unfolded the letter first. Hazel. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain things the way I wanted to. Lucas has been helping me, but something hasn't felt right. I can't always keep track of what I've signed. Some days I trust him. Other days I don't trust my own memory. I asked Mr. Collins to prepare a version of my wishes that I could keep separate. Not because I don't love my family, but because I want someone to double-check that I'm not being rushed or confused. You've always been the careful one. If something feels wrong to you, don't ignore it. I trust you to see clearly even when I can't. Grandma, I read it twice. Then a third time slower. Every word felt deliberate. Not emotional, not dramatic, just precise. Like she knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote it. Behind the letter was the second document. I slid it free and unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a full will. It looked more like a draft or a preliminary instruction, something a lawyer prepares before finalizing the official version. But the distribution listed there was completely different from what Lucas had presented. Balanced, thoughtful, fair, and most importantly, the signature at the bottom matched her natural rhythm perfectly. Not the controlled, imitated version I'd seen on the filed will. This one had variation, slight pressure shifts, a hesitation in the middle of the P in Parker that I recognized instantly. It was real. My heartbeat picked up. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was a contradiction. I flipped the page over, checking for anything else, dates, notes, markings. There was a date. 2 months before the will Lucas filed. Close enough to matter, far enough to raise questions. I leaned back against the desk, letting the weight of it settle in. Grandma had known something was off. She'd tried to create a safeguard. And somehow that safeguard ended up locked in a drawer Lucas didn't think I'd open, which meant one of two things. Either he didn't know it existed, or he knew and believed it wouldn't matter. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I froze. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I slid the letter and document back into the envelope just as the bedroom door opened. Lucas stood there. Not surprised. Just watching. Couldn't sleep, he asked. I stood up, the envelope still in my hand. Neither could you, apparently. His eyes dropped briefly to the envelope, then back to my face. That's private, he said. It has my name on it. That doesn't mean it's yours to go through. I held his gaze. You locked it. For a reason. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm starting to understand that. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. You don't know what you're looking at, he said. Then explain it. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. That's an old draft, he said finally, before she made her final decisions. Funny, I replied, keeping my voice steady, because this looks more consistent with everything she's ever signed before. She changed her mind. Did she? I asked. Or did someone help her change it? His expression hardened. You're crossing a line, Hazel. No, I said. I think I just found it. Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. You've always had this problem, he said after a moment. You assume the worst in people. I look for patterns, I replied. That's my job, and your job is making you paranoid. And your job, I said, is... What exactly? That hit. I saw it in the way his shoulders tightened. I've been here, he said, day in and day out, taking care of her, while you were in Chicago analyzing strangers. I'm not questioning that I said. I'm questioning what you did with the access that gave you. His jaw clenched. You think I'd take advantage of her? I think you had the opportunity, I said, and I think you're very good at making things look legitimate. For a second, I thought he might snap, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Be careful, he said, because if you push this, it won't just affect me. I didn't respond, because I already knew what he meant. Family, reputation, the story people choose to believe. He looked at the envelope one more time. Put it back, he said. I shook my head. No. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he exhaled slowly like he was recalibrating. Fine, he said. Keep it. It won't change anything. That's where you're wrong. He tilted his head slightly. You think one letter is enough to undo a signed filed will? I think it's enough to ask questions, I said, and questions are where things start to fall apart. For the first time since I'd arrived, his confidence flickered. Just a little. But I saw it, and that was all I needed. He opened the door again, stepping back into the hallway.
"Get some rest, Hazel," he said. "You're going to need it."
Then he was gone. I stood there, the envelope still in my hand, my pulse steadying. He thought this wouldn't change anything. Maybe he was right. A letter wasn't proof. A draft wasn't a final document. But together, with the signatures, the timing, the inconsistencies, it was a beginning. I looked down at Grandma's handwriting again. "I trust you to see clearly." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside. Because now, for the first time, I wasn't just trying to understand what Lucas had done. I was getting ready to prove it. Preparing for court didn't feel like preparing for a fight. It felt like preparing to be misunderstood. Rachel Kim said that to me during our first strategy session, and at the time I thought she was exaggerating. By the end of the week, I realized she wasn't. We sat across from each other in her office, a clean, controlled space with just enough warmth to keep clients from feeling like they were already on trial. "Let's be clear about one thing," Rachel said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. "This is not a handwriting case." I frowned. "It looks like one." "That's exactly the trap," she replied. "If we focus on whether the signature is real or fake, we lose." I leaned back slightly. "Because Lucas has a real one." "Yes," she said. "Or something close enough to survive casual scrutiny. And more importantly, he has context. Video. Witnesses. A timeline that appears coherent." I didn't like the word appears. "So what do we have?" I asked. She tapped the envelope from Grandma, the one I'd found in the drawer. "We have contradiction," she said, "and contradiction creates doubt. But doubt alone doesn't win cases." "I know," I said. "We need something objective." "Exactly," I nodded slowly. "Paper, ink, sequence." Rachel's eyes sharpened slightly. "Now we're talking." I walked her through everything I'd seen so far. The pressure inconsistencies, the unnatural uniformity, the possibility of signature transfer. Then I showed her the comparison between the draft Grandma had written and the filed will Lucas submitted. Rachel didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair thinking. "If what you're suggesting is true," she said, "then Lucas didn't forge a signature from scratch." "He reused one," I said. "Or traced from a real sample," which is harder to prove, she added. "Yes," I agreed. "But not impossible." She reached for a yellow legal pad and started writing. "Walk me through the physical differences," she said. "Not the signature. The material." I pulled out 2 copies I'd requested through Discovery scanned versions for now, but the originals would be presented in court. "This one," I said, pointing to the filed will, "has a smoother surface. You can see it in the way the ink sits. Less absorption. And the other more fiber texture. Slight feathering at the edges of the strokes." Rachel nodded. "Different paper stock." "Exactly. And you think the signature was originally placed on one, then transferred to the other?" "That's my working theory." She tapped her pen against the pad. "We'll need to demonstrate that in a way the judge can understand without a science degree." "I can do that," I said. "I know you can," she replied. "The question is whether they'll let you." That part hadn't escaped me. Across the table, Lucas's attorney had already filed motions to limit expert testimony, especially mine. "He's trying to keep this simple," I said. "Because simple favors him," Rachel replied. "A caring grandson, a declining grandmother, a final decision captured on video." "And me?" I asked. She gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "A distant relative with a financial interest and a very specific skill set that could look convenient." I exhaled slowly. "So, I'm the suspicious one." "You're the one they can frame that way," she said. That stung more than I expected. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was exactly the narrative Lucas had been building. "Then we don't play into it," I said. Rachel tilted her head slightly. "Go on." "We don't argue that I'm right," I said. "We show that the documents don't agree with each other, that something doesn't line up, and let the court draw its own conclusions." "Yes." She smiled, this time with a hint of approval. "That's better." For a moment the room felt steady again, until she flipped to the next page in the file. "There's something else," she said. I felt my stomach tighten. "What?" She turned the document toward me. A still image from the video Lucas had submitted. Grandma sitting at the table, pen in hand, signing the will. "I've watched this 5 times, Rachel said, "and there's a cut here." She pointed to a subtle shift in lighting between frames. "Most people won't notice it," she continued, "but you might." I leaned forward, studying it. At first glance, it looked continuous, but then I saw it. The angle of the paper, the position of her hand, slightly different. "This isn't one take," I said quietly. "No." Rachel agreed. "It's at least 2. I felt a chill run through me, "which means we don't actually see the entire signing process," I said. "Correct. And we don't know if the paper she signs at the beginning is the same one at the end." Rachel nodded. "Exactly." For the first time since this started, I felt something shift. Not relief, not confidence, something more precise. Alignment. Pieces that had felt disconnected were starting to form a pattern. Lucas hadn't just relied on one trick. He'd layered them. A real signature, a controlled environment, edited video, and a narrative that made any challenge look like greed. "Can we prove the edit?" I asked. "We can raise it," Rachel said. "But proving intent is harder. What matters is creating enough inconsistency that the judge questions the integrity of the document." I nodded slowly. "That's where the paper comes in," I said. "Yes," she replied. "Because paper doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. It doesn't care about family dynamics." I looked down at the still image again, at Grandma's hand, at the pen, at the moment that was supposed to settle everything. Lucas thought he covered everything I said. Rachel didn't respond right away. Then she said, "Most people who do something like this don't think in layers the way you do." I met her gaze. He didn't expect me to look this closely. "No," she said. "He expected you to stay out of it." I leaned back, the weight of that settling in. He hadn't just underestimated the evidence. He'd underestimated me. Rachel closed the file. "We'll get our chance in court," she said, "but you need to be ready for one more thing." "What, they're going to come after your credibility?" she said. "Hard." I nodded. "I figured. They'll say you're biased, that you're using your expertise to create doubt where there is none. I'm not creating anything," I said. "I'm pointing to what's already there." "I know that," she said. "But you'll need to show it, not just say it." I understood. This wasn't about convincing people I was right. It was about making it impossible to ignore the inconsistencies, even for a moment. As I gathered my things, Rachel added one last thing. "Bring everything you have," she said. "Originals, notes, anything that helps establish sequence." "I will." "And Hazel," she said just before I reached the door. I turned back. "If there's anything you're holding back, anything you're not sure about, you need to decide now whether it helps or hurts you." I thought about the envelope, the letter, the draft, the conversation with Lucas in the bedroom, and the way he'd said, "It won't change anything." "I'm not holding back," I said. But as I walked out of her office, I realized something. Lucas hadn't tried to take the envelope from me. He hadn't even really argued about it, which meant he wasn't afraid of it. And that raised a question I hadn't asked yet. What was he confident I still hadn't found? The lab always calmed me down. It was the one place where things didn't depend on opinion's tone or who told the more convincing story. Paper either matched or it didn't. Ink either behaved consistently or it didn't. And right now, I needed that kind of clarity. Ethan handed me a fresh set of gloves.
"You look like you haven't slept," he said.
"I haven't," I replied, slipping them on. "Let's get started." On the table in front of us were the two most important pieces of evidence I'd seen so far: the officially filed will Lucas had submitted and the earlier draft I'd found in Grandma's drawer. Both originals, both bearing her signature, and somehow both telling completely different stories. "Walk me through your plan," Ethan said. "We start with the paper I said, not the writing." He nodded. "Because that's where you think the mistake is." "That's where I know the mistake is," I corrected. I positioned the first document under a low-angle light source. "Paper isn't just paper," I said. "It's manufactured in batches. Each batch has a slightly different fiber composition, thickness, surface treatment." Ethan leaned closer as I adjusted the angle. "See that I pointed to the faint texture beneath the surface? That's a coated finish. It's smoother, less absorbent." He nodded slowly. "And the other one I switched documents. This one is uncoated, more porous. The ink spreads slightly into the fibers." "So they're different," he said. "Yes, and that alone isn't illegal. Documents can be printed on different paper, but not if they're supposed to be the same document," he added. "Exactly." I reached for a magnifier and positioned it over the signature on the filed will. "Now look at the ink," I said. Ethan squinted. "It sits on top more." "Right," I said. "Minimal absorption. That's consistent with coated paper." I moved the magnifier to the draft. "Here the ink feathers slightly at the edges. That's what happens when it soaks into the fibers." He exhaled. "So even if the signatures look similar, they were written on different surfaces," I finished, "which affects how the pen behaves." Ethan straightened. "Could someone replicate that?" "Not perfectly," I said. "Not without leaving inconsistencies." I stepped back for a moment, letting the pieces settle. "Now comes the part that matters," I said. I dimmed the overhead lights and positioned a stronger angled beam across both documents. "Dow, ep," I murmured instinctively, then corrected myself. "Indentation impressions." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're switching languages now." "Sorry," I said faintly. "It's habit." I adjusted the light until the surface of the paper revealed subtle ridges barely visible unless you knew where to look. "Every time you write on paper," I explained, "you leave pressure marks not just on that sheet, but on the one beneath it." Ethan leaned in, his expression sharpening. "So if she signed multiple documents in a stack, the page below would carry a faint imprint of the one above." He nodded slowly. "Okay." I pointed to the draft. "Look here." At first it looked like nothing. Then, as he shifted his angle slightly, it appeared a faint ghost-like impression of writing that didn't belong to the document itself. "That's not from this page," he said. "No," I replied. "It's from a page that was on top of it when it was written." And the filed will, I moved the light. Nothing. No matching indentation. No corresponding pattern. Just a clean surface. Ethan frowned. "That's wrong." "It's inconsistent," I said. "If both documents were signed in the same session, or even in similar conditions, you'd expect some continuity in those impressions. But there isn't." "No," I stepped back, crossing my arms, which means one of two things I said. Either they were signed at completely different times under completely different conditions, or one of them wasn't signed the way it appears. I nodded. Ethan looked between the two documents again. You think he took a real signature and moved it? That's the most consistent explanation, I said. He had access. He had time. And he had a reason. Ethan let out a low whistle. That's not something a jury just understands. I know, I said, which is why I have to make it simple. I pulled out a blank sheet of similar uncoated paper and placed it on the table. Watch this. I wrote a quick line across the top sheet, pressing firmly. Then I lifted it. The page beneath showed a faint indentation clear enough to trace if you knew what you were doing. Now imagine someone takes that top sheet, I said, keeps the signature, and replaces the bottom page with a different document. Ethan nodded slowly. Then the indentation no longer matches the content. Exactly. I gestured toward the evidence. That's what we're seeing here. Silence settled over the room. Not the tense kind. The kind that comes when something finally makes sense. Ethan broke it first. Do you think Lucas knows about this? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the filed will again, at how clean it was, how controlled, how intentional. He knows enough to be confident, I said finally, but not enough to catch this. I shook my head. This isn't obvious. Most people don't even think to look for it. Ethan leaned back against the counter. So this is it. It's part of it, I said. It's what turns suspicion into structure. And in court, I show them the difference, I said. I walk them through it step by step. No jargon, no assumptions. And Lucas, I thought about him standing in the doorway telling me it wouldn't change anything. He'll try to keep it emotional, I said. Family, trust, loyalty. And you, I stay with the facts. Ethan nodded once. That's your strength. I didn't respond, because strength didn't feel like the right word. This felt like responsibility. I gathered the documents carefully, placing them back into protective sleeves. As I did, something caught my eye. A faint mark on the lower edge of the filed will. Not ink. Not indentation. Something else. I held it up to the light, adjusting the angle. Ethan stepped closer. What is that? I'm not sure, I said quietly. It looked like a partial impression. Not from writing. From pressure. Like something had been pressed against the paper. After the signature was already there, I felt a slow, uneasy realization begin to form. This wasn't just transferred, I said. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? I lowered the document, my pulse picking up again. I think he tried to reconstruct the entire context, I said. Not just the signature. And something went wrong. I nodded. Because whatever that mark was, it didn't belong. And if I could figure out where it came from, it might prove exactly how far Lucas had gone to make everything look real. The courtroom felt colder than it had the first time. Not physically. The air was the same. The lighting was the same. But the way people looked at me had shifted. Less curiosity, more judgment. I could feel it as I walked to my seat beside Rachel. They're leaning his way, she murmured without looking at me. I know, I said. Across the room, Lucas sat with his attorney, calm and composed, like this was just another formality. He didn't glance at me. He didn't need to. The story already favored him. Grandson who stayed. Granddaughter who left. Caretaker versus outsider. Ms. Allen, the judge said, bringing the room to order. We'll continue with cross-examination. Lucas's attorney stood first. He was careful, measured, the kind of person who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to.
Ms. Allen,
He began.
you've testified that you work as a forensic document examiner. That's correct. And you've built a career on identifying inconsistencies in documents. Yes.
He nodded slightly.
Would you agree that your professional background might lead you to see issues where others see none?
Rachel stiffened beside me, but I answered calmly.
My work requires me to evaluate evidence, not assume conclusions. Of course, he said smoothly. But you also stand to gain financially if this will is invalidated, correct?
There it was.
I'm named in both versions, I replied. But my concern is whether the document reflects my grandmother's actual intent.
He gave a small smile.
Intent is difficult to measure, isn't it? Not when it's contradicted by physical evidence.
A faint murmur moved through the room. He let the silence sit for a moment before continuing.
You've suggested that the signature on the will may have been reused, he said. Transferred from another document. Yes. And yet we have video evidence of your grandmother signing the will in question.
He gestured toward the screen. The video played again. Grandma sitting at the table, the pen in her hand. The slow, deliberate motion of her signing her name. From a distance, it looked complete, convincing. I watched it carefully, not for what it showed, for what it didn't. When it ended, he turned back to me.
Can you point to any moment in this video where the document is replaced? No, I said. Any moment where the signature is transferred? No.
He spread his hand slightly.
So your theory relies on what you believe happened outside of what we can see. My analysis relies on the physical properties of the documents themselves, I said.
He nodded.
Let's talk about that. He approached the evidence table, picking up the filed will. You've stated that the paper used here differs from another document you brought in. Yes. And you believe that difference indicates wrongdoing. It indicates inconsistency I corrected, which requires explanation.
He held up the document.
Is it uncommon for different documents to be printed on different types of paper? No. So the mere presence of different paper does not prove fraud. Not by itself.
He set the document down.
And the indentations you described, pressure marks from writing those, can vary depending on how the documents are handled. Correct. They can, I said. But patterns still emerge.
He paused, then looked directly at me.
Ms. Allen, isn't it true that what you're presenting is an interpretation?
Rachel shifted slightly, but I answered before she could object.
It's an analysis based on observable evidence, which requires interpretation, he repeated.
Everything requires interpretation, I said. The question is whether the interpretation fits all the facts. He smiled faintly, like I'd walked into something he'd been setting up.
Exactly, he said.
He turned toward the judge.
Your Honor, what we have here is a family dispute dressed up as forensic certainty.
Rachel stood immediately.
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained, the judge said.
Stick to questions.
The attorney nodded and returned his attention to me.
No further questions.
He sat down. For a brief moment, the room was quiet. Then Rachel stood.
Your Honor,
she said we would like to call Ms. Allen to provide a demonstration regarding the physical properties of the documents in question. The judge considered that.
Proceed.
Rachel nodded to me. Hazel, she said quietly. I stood walking to the front of the room. Every step felt deliberate, measured. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew this was the moment everything shifted or didn't. I placed 2 sheets of paper on the demonstration table, one coded, one uncoded.
"This won't take long," I said. My voice was steady, clear. "I'm not asking the court to take my word for anything," I continued. "I'm asking you to look." I wrote a short line on the top sheet, pressing firmly. Then I lifted it. The sheet beneath showed a faint indentation. "This is what happens when a document is signed in a stack," I said. "The pressure transfers to the page below." I turned to the actual evidence. If two documents are signed in the same session under similar conditions, you expect to see continuity in those impressions. I picked up the draft. Here we do. Then the filed will. And here we don't. I angled it under the light, letting the surface speak for itself. No indentation. No corresponding pattern. Just absence. I let the silence sit, not forcing it, just allowing it. Finally, I spoke again. "This doesn't tell us everything I said, but it tells us something important." I looked at the judge. "These two documents do not share the same physical history." A murmur moved through the room again. Subtle, but different this time. Less certain. Across the room, I saw Lucas shift in his seat for the first time. Just slightly. Just enough. Rachel stepped forward. No further questions. I returned to my seat. My pulse was steady, but something had changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but I could feel it. The narrative wasn't as clean anymore. The certainty Lucas had built it had a crack in it now, and sometimes that's all it takes. The judge glanced down at his notes, then back up. "We'll take a brief recess," he said, "and then proceed with further examination." The gavel struck lightly. People began to move. Whispers filled the room. Rachel leaned toward me. "That was good," she said quietly. "Not enough yet," I replied. "No," she agreed. But it moved the ground. I nodded, because she was right. This wasn't the end. It was the shift before the collapse. And as I looked across the room at Lucas, I realized something else. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the documents, like he was trying to figure out which detail had betrayed him. When the court reconvened, the room felt different, quieter, not because people had lost interest, but because they were listening more carefully. The certainty had thinned. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents again. "Ms. Kim," he said to Rachel, "you may proceed." Rachel stood. "Your Honor, we would like to walk through the physical inconsistencies between the two documents in a structured way." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rachel turned to me. "Hazel, can you explain step by step what the court is looking at in plain language?" I stood again this time without hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor." I moved to the table and placed both documents side by side. "I'm going to focus on three things," I said. "Paper ink behavior and pressure marks. No jargon, no shortcuts, just clarity. First, the paper," I continued. "These two documents are supposed to represent the same event, my grandmother signing a will, but they are made from different types of paper." I held them up one at a time. "This one," I said, indicating the filed will, has a coated surface. It's smoother. Ink sits on top. Then the draft. This one is uncoated. Ink absorbs slightly into the fibers. I set them down. That difference matters because it changes how writing appears and behaves. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Second, the ink," I said. "When someone writes on coated paper, the lines are sharper. On uncoated paper, the edges soften slightly." I pointed to the signatures. "These differences are consistent across each document, which tells us they were written on those surfaces, not altered afterward."
Lucas's attorney shifted in his seat. I continued before he could interrupt. Third and most important, the pressure marks. I angled the documents under the light again. When someone writes on a piece of paper, they leave faint impressions on the sheet beneath it. These are called indentations. I paused, letting that settle. If two documents are signed in the same session, especially in a stack, you expect some continuity between those impressions. I pointed to the draft. Here we see evidence of that. Indentations that suggest it was part of a stack. Then I pointed to the filed will. Here we don't. Silence. Not empty. Focused. These two documents do not share the same physical history, I said again more firmly this time. Rachel stepped in. Hazel, based on your analysis, what is the most consistent explanation for that difference? I took a breath, not because I was unsure, but because this was the moment where everything had to connect. The most consistent explanation, I said, is that the signature was originally written on one document and then reused on another. A ripple moved through the room. Lucas's attorney stood immediately. Objection, speculation. Rachel didn't hesitate. The witness is offering an expert opinion based on physical evidence. The judge held up a hand. Overruled, he said. The court will consider the weight of the testimony, I continued. This doesn't require guessing intent, I said. It only requires acknowledging that the physical evidence does not support a single continuous signing event. Lucas shifted again, more noticeably this time. Rachel nodded to me. No further questions. I stepped back. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lucas's attorney rose slowly. Your Honor, he said we would like to recall Mr. Reed. Lucas stood. He walked to the front of the room with the same controlled pace he'd had all day. But when he took the stand, I saw it. A slight tension in his shoulders. The first real crack. His attorney approached him. Lucas, he said you've heard Ms. Allen's testimony. Did you at any point alter or transfer your grandmother's signature? No, Lucas said firmly. Did you present any document to this court that was not signed by your grandmother? No. His voice was steady. Practiced. Then Rachel stood. May I? The judge nodded. Rachel approached the stand, her tone calm. Mr. Reed, she said you stated earlier that you assisted your grandmother with paperwork, correct? Yes. And that you were present when she signed the will in question? Yes. She picked up the filed will. Can you explain why this document shows no indentation consistent with being signed in a stack, while another document from the same period does? Lucas didn't answer immediately. He looked at the paper, then at Rachel. I don't know, he said. That's fair, Rachel replied. Let me ask it differently. She held up both documents. Do you maintain that these were signed under the same general circumstances? Yes. Same table? Same setting? Yes. Rachel nodded slightly. Then how do you account for the difference in physical characteristics? Another pause. Longer this time. I'm not a paper expert, Lucas said. No, Rachel agreed. But you were the one managing the documents. Silence. She stepped closer. Mr. Reed, did your grandmother ever sign a document more than once because you told her there was an issue with the first version? Lucas's eyes flickered just for a second. I don't remember, he said. Rachel didn't push harder. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped back. No further questions. Lucas remained on the stand for a moment longer, then stepped down. The room felt heavier now, not with tension, with realization. The judge looked down at his notes, then back up. I will take a brief recess before issuing a ruling, he said. The gavel struck again. This time the silence that followed wasn't uncertain. It was waiting. Rachel leaned toward me. He felt that she said quietly. I nodded, because I had seen it too. Lucas wasn't arguing anymore. He was reacting. And that meant something had shifted beyond repair. As people began to file out of the courtroom, I stayed seated, watching, thinking. Because even now, one detail still lingered in my mind. That faint pressure mark on the filed will, the one that didn't belong. If the judge saw what we had shown, that might be enough. But if I could explain that last detail, how the document had been reconstructed, then it wouldn't just be doubt. It would be clarity. And clarity was something Lucas couldn't talk his way out of. The judge didn't keep us waiting long. When we were called back into the courtroom, the air felt still, like everything had already been decided somewhere quieter, somewhere more certain than the space we were sitting in. Judge Carter adjusted the papers in front of him, then looked up. "I've reviewed the testimony, the documents, and the demonstrations provided," he said. "This case is not about family disagreement. It is about the integrity of a legal instrument." No one moved. No one spoke. The court finds that there are significant and unresolved inconsistencies in the physical characteristics of the will submitted by Mr. Reed, he continued. These inconsistencies undermine the reliability of the document as a true and complete representation of the decedent's intent. Lucas didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead. The presence of a valid signature alone, the judge said, does not cure questions surrounding how that signature was applied, preserved, or potentially transferred. I felt something in my chest loosen. Not relief. Not yet. The court therefore declines to admit the contested will as controlling, he said. Further proceedings will be required to determine the appropriate distribution of the estate, including review of prior documents. There it was. Not a dramatic ending. Not a sudden collapse. But a clear shift in power. Lucas's version of the story, his certainty, was no longer the foundation. It was just one version among many. The gavel came down once. This matter is adjourned. People began to stand, to whisper, to move. But I stayed where I was for a moment, because what I felt wasn't victory, it was quiet. Rachel touched my arm lightly. "You did exactly what you needed to do," she said. "I didn't win," I replied. "You changed the outcome," she said. "That's what matters." Across the room, Lucas finally stood. For a second, our eyes met. There was no anger in his expression, no apology either, just something more complicated, something that looked almost like exhaustion. He walked toward me slower than I expected. Rachel tensed slightly beside me, but I shook my head. "It's fine," I said. Lucas stopped a few feet away. "You always had to be right," he said quietly. I didn't react to the tone. "I needed the truth to be clear," I replied. He let out a short breath. "You think that changes anything?" "It already has," I said. He looked down briefly, then back at me. "You weren't here," he said. "You didn't see what it was like at the end." "I know," I said, "and I'm not pretending I did." That seemed to catch him off guard. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about winning. It was about something else. "She trusted me," he said. "I was the one who stayed." "And that mattered," I said. "It still does." He frowned slightly. "Then why do this?" "Because you crossed a line." I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I said, "Because staying doesn't give you the right to decide everything." Silence settled between us. Not hostile. Just final. After a moment, he nodded once. Not agreement. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. Then he walked away. I watched him go, feeling the weight of it in a way I hadn't expected. Because this wasn't a clean ending. There was no moment where everything made sense and everyone understood. There was just the truth and what each of us chose to do with it. A few weeks later, I went back to Dayton one last time. The house felt different without Grandma. Quieter. Not empty exactly. Just finished. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked up, hesitated, then said I should have listened to you. I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't hear her, but because I didn't need to respond the way she expected. I needed you to trust me, I said finally. I know, she said softly. We stood there for a moment, the space between us smaller than it had been, but not gone. And that was okay. In Grandma's room, the desk was still there. The drawer was open now, empty. I ran my hand over the surface, remembering the moment I found the envelope, the moment everything shifted. I didn't take anything with me when I left. Not the documents, not the memories I couldn't carry, just the understanding that some things don't get resolved neatly, and some relationships don't go back to what they were. But that doesn't mean you stay silent, or that you accept a version of the truth that isn't real. As I stepped outside, the wind moved through the trees the same way it always had. Nothing about the world looked different, but I was. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. After everything that happened, I kept thinking about how easy it is to confuse closeness with authority. Just because someone is present day after day doesn't mean they get to decide what's right for everyone else. And just because something looks official doesn't mean it reflects the truth. If you've ever been in a situation where family expectations, loyalty, or pressure made you question your own judgment, you're not alone. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you're choosing conflict. It means you're choosing clarity. And sometimes clarity comes quietly through patient observation and the willingness to trust what you see even when others don't want to. There's a difference between forgiveness and access. You can let go of anger without reopening doors that led to harm. That took me a long time to understand. If this story resonates with you, I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if you want to follow more stories like this about truth boundaries and finding your footing again, you're always welcome to stay. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.